Have you ever felt a wave of overwhelming emotion after sex, maybe even the urge to cry? Not out of sadness, not out of regret, but something deeper, something you can't quite explain? If you're a man who's experienced this, you're not alone. In fact, this phenomenon has roots far beyond biology. It's tied to the very fabric of the human psyche. And one of history's greatest psychologists, Carl Jung, might hold the key to understanding why. 1. The unexplained phenomenon, post-coital tears. It's called post-coital tristesse, PCT, the medical term for the sadness, emptiness, or even tears that can follow sex. While it's often discussed in women, it's far less acknowledged in men. Yet studies suggest up to 40% of men have experienced it at least once. Some describe it as a sudden melancholy, others as an inexplicable release, like a dam breaking. Society often brushes it off as a hormonal blip, but what if it's something far more profound? 2. The stigma around male vulnerability. Men aren't supposed to cry, especially not after sex. We're conditioned to see sex as conquest, release, or performance, never as a doorway to emotional vulnerability. When a man sheds tears in this context, it's often met with confusion, shame, or even ridicule. But this reaction says more about culture than it does about the truth of male psychology. What if these tears aren't weakness, but a sign of something deeper trying to surface? 3. Carl Jung's radical perspective. This is where Carl Jung, the pioneer of analytical psychology, offers a startling lens. Jung believed that sex isn't just a physical act, it's a psychic event, a collision of conscious and unconscious forces. In those moments of intimacy, something primal stirs, the shadow, the anima, the inner feminine, or even buried trauma. For Jung, post-sex tears could be the psyche's way of rebalancing, of integrating what's been repressed. Think of it like this: sex lowers the ego's defenses. In that raw, unfiltered state, emotions that were locked away, grief, longing, existential loneliness, suddenly find an opening. And for men, who are rarely given permission to express such depth, the body speaks instead. Tears become the unconscious's language. At first glance, the wave of emotion that crashes over some men after sex seems like it could be neatly explained by biology. Science tells us that during orgasm, the brain is flooded with a cocktail of chemicals. Oxytocin, the so-called love hormone, promotes bonding and tenderness, while prolactin surges are linked to the refractory period and a sudden drop in arousal. On paper, this hormonal shift could account for the abrupt transition from intense pleasure to something more vulnerable, even melancholic. But while these physiological factors set the stage, they don't fully explain why some men experience this moment as a profound emotional unraveling rather than a simple come-down. Biology gives us the mechanism, but it doesn't account for the meaning, the way a man might feel as though he's glimpsed something vast and ineffable in the aftermath of intimacy, or why those tears carry the weight of memory, longing, or even existential sorrow. The limits of a purely biological explanation become clear when we consider how differently individuals experience post-coital emotions. Not every man cries after sex, even with identical hormonal fluctuations, and those who do often describe sensations that transcend physicality, a haunting sense of nostalgia, a confrontation with loneliness, or an overwhelming surge of love that feels almost painful. These reactions are deeply personal, shaped by unconscious material, past experiences, and the unique landscape of the psyche. This is where the biological perspective falls short. It can't tell us why one man feels shattered by vulnerability in this moment while another feels nothing but satisfaction. The body's chemicals may lower the gates, but what comes rushing through is the stuff of the soul. Carl Jung's work offers a way to bridge this gap between body and psyche. He saw sex as far more than a biological function. It was a sacred encounter with the unconscious, a momentary dissolution of the ego that could unleash buried archetypal forces. In Jung's framework, the act of sex isn't just a physical release. It's a symbolic union, a ritual that stirs the depths of the psyche. When a man cries afterward, it might be his anima, the unconscious feminine aspect of his soul, making herself known, or his shadow rising to the surface in the absence of ego defenses. For Jung, these tears could signal a confrontation with repressed grief, unacknowledged desire, or even a spiritual longing that ordinary life keeps at bay. The body's chemistry facilitates the moment, but the emotion itself belongs to the realm of symbol and story, the hidden language of the inner world. This isn't to dismiss biology, but to place it in conversation with something larger. The hormonal drop might explain why the defenses fall, but Jung helps us understand what emerges when they do. Why some men weep not from sadness, but from awe at the sudden presence of something they can't name. It's the difference between describing a storm's atmospheric pressure and standing in the rain, feeling it soak through your skin. Science maps the terrain, but the psyche is the traveler, and its journey through intimacy is anything but linear. When a man cries after sex, he's not just reacting to prolactin, he's meeting himself in a place where logic dissolves, and the oldest, most hidden parts of him rise to the surface at last. At the heart of Jung's psychology lies a revolutionary idea, that within every man exists an unconscious feminine counterpart, the anima. This isn't merely about gender traits or social conditioning, but something far more primordial. The anima represents the totality of a man's unconscious feminine aspects, his capacity for intuition, emotional depth, creativity, and his most vulnerable longings. She is, as Jung famously wrote, the eternal image of woman, not the image of this or that particular woman, but a definite feminine image, an archetype woven into the very fabric of the male psyche. She emerges in dreams as mysterious female figures, in projections onto romantic partners, and most powerfully, in moments when the conscious mind loosens its grip, like the raw, unfiltered state after sex. When a man engages in sexual intimacy, he isn't just encountering his partner, he's confronting this buried feminine essence within himself. The act of sex, in Jung's view, is a symbolic merging that temporarily dissolves the ego's boundaries, allowing the anima to surface with startling intensity. This is why post-coital emotions can feel so disproportionate to the physical act itself. A man might suddenly weep, not for his partner, but for the anima's sudden visibility, the shock of recognizing an inner world he's spent a lifetime suppressing. She carries with her all the unexpressed tenderness, grief, and beauty that patriarchal norms have taught him to deny. In that vulnerable moment after climax, when the body is spent and the mind is quiet, the anima speaks in a language beyond words, through tears that seem to come from nowhere, through a melancholy that feels ancient, or through an overwhelming sense of connection that borders on the sacred. This encounter explains why post-sex clarity can be so emotionally destabilizing. For a brief window, the anima isn't just a shadowy figure in dreams, she's integrated, flooding the conscious mind with what Jung called the feeling-toned contents of the unconscious. A man accustomed to identifying solely with his masculine traits, rationality, control, ambition, suddenly finds himself awash in feminine energy, not as an abstract concept, but as a visceral, undeniable presence. This collision of opposites is inherently overwhelming. It's as if a door normally kept locked swings open, revealing rooms in his psyche he forgot existed. The tears that follow are less about sadness than about recognition, of all he's disowned in himself to conform to rigid masculine ideals, of the depth he's been taught to fear, and of the paradoxical truth that union with another requires first acknowledging the stranger within. Jung's framework helps us see these post-sex emotions not as random hormonal glitches, but as moments of profound psychological significance. When a man cries after intimacy, it may be his anima demanding to be heard, not as a weakness, but as a call toward wholeness. In a culture that equates masculinity with emotional restraint, these tears are a rebellion against fragmentation. They signal that the psyche refuses to be split in two forever, that the feminine, not as gender, but as a universal force of connection and feeling, will always return to claim its place in a man's inner world. As Jung warned, the anima must be accepted as a natural part of one's being, otherwise she will exact a terrible price. Perhaps those inexplicable post-coital tears are the first installment of that payment, and an invitation to finally meet the unseen woman who's been walking through the halls of his psyche all along. The moments following sexual intimacy represent one of the most psychologically vulnerable states a man can experience, a temporary suspension of ego defenses where the boundaries between conscious and unconscious blur. In this raw, unfiltered space, something remarkable happens. The carefully constructed persona we present to the world weakens, and what Jung called the shadow, those rejected, suppressed aspects of ourselves, finds an opening to emerge. This explains why what should be a moment of satisfaction and connection can sometimes transform into an unexpected emotional storm. The shadow doesn't announce its arrival politely. It crashes through in waves of inexplicable sadness, sudden shame, or overwhelming vulnerability that seem disproportionate to the act itself. What makes this post-sexual state particularly potent for shadow work is its unique combination of physical release and psychological exposure. As the body relaxes after climax, the mind's usual defense mechanisms, rationalization, distraction, emotional control, are momentarily disarmed. In this unguarded state, buried material that the ego normally keeps at bay rises to the surface. Childhood wounds, unprocessed trauma, repressed memories, or even societal conditioning about masculinity and sexuality. A man might find himself ambushed by feelings of guilt about past relationships, shame about his desires, or grief over lost intimacy, emotions he may not even realize he's been carrying. The tears that follow aren't about the present moment, but about all the unloved parts of himself that choose this vulnerable window to finally demand attention. This phenomenon reveals why post-coital tears can feel both devastating and cathartic. They represent what happens when the psyche seizes an opportunity to purge what's been suppressed. Jung understood that the shadow doesn't disappear when ignored, it grows stronger in the darkness, manifesting in projections, compulsions, or unexplained moods. The emotional release after sex may be the psyche's way of initiating its own healing process, using the body's natural state of openness to facilitate what talk therapy often struggles to achieve: direct access to the unconscious. In this light, what society might dismiss as mere post-sex blues could actually be a profound moment of self-reckoning, where a man comes face to face with aspects of himself he's spent years, perhaps decades, avoiding. The cultural expectation that men should feel only satisfaction after sex makes this shadow material particularly confusing and isolating. When a man experiences sadness or vulnerability instead, he's likely to judge himself harshly, compounding the original wound with layers of shame about not performing masculinity correctly. Yet from a Jungian perspective, these very emotions, if approached with curiosity rather than judgment, hold the key to greater self-awareness and integration. The tears aren't a sign of weakness, but evidence of the psyche's intelligence, its relentless movement toward wholeness. In that vulnerable post-sex space, when the armor is off and the heart is open, a man has the rare opportunity to meet his shadow not as an enemy, but as a long-neglected part of himself asking finally to be seen and accepted. The profound emotional release some men experience after sex cannot be fully understood through psychology alone. we must turn to the sacred traditions that recognized sexual union as something far greater than a biological act. Across cultures and epochs, from the tantric practices of Hinduism to the alchemical traditions of medieval Europe, sex was revered as a gateway to the divine, a ritual capable of dissolving the boundaries between the physical and spiritual realms. These traditions understood what modern psychology often forgets, that the merging of bodies can become a merging of souls, and that the vulnerability following union creates an opening for transcendent experience. In Tantra, the sexual act becomes a sacred meditation, where partners serve as living embodiments of cosmic principles, Shiva and Shakti, consciousness and energy, whose union mirrors the creation of the universe itself. Similarly, Western alchemy used the symbolism of the hieros gamos or sacred marriage, where the conjunction of masculine and feminine principles represented the ultimate transformation of base matter into spiritual gold. When we view post-coital tears through this lens, they appear not as random emotional leakage, but as evidence of an ancient knowing that in our most intimate moments, we brush against something eternal. At the heart of these traditions lies the powerful Jungian concept of the union of opposites, the reconciliation of masculine and feminine energies that exists both between partners and within each individual. This sacred union triggers what mystics across traditions describe as a transcendent state, the alchemical mysterium conjunctionis, the tantric samadhi, or the ecstatic dissolution of the Sufi poets. In psychological terms, this represents the temporary integration of conscious and unconscious, where the anima and animus, the inner feminine and masculine, cease their battle and experience harmony. For men conditioned to live entirely from their masculine consciousness, rational, controlled, and goal-oriented, this sudden influx of feminine energy can feel both overwhelming and revelatory. The tears that follow may represent the shattering of old psychic structures, making way for a more complete self. This explains why some men report mystical experiences after sex, visions, out-of-body sensations, or a profound sense of unity with all existence, as the psyche momentarily transcends its usual limitations. These post-sexual mystical states often include what ancient traditions recognized as purgation, a cleansing release of accumulated emotional and spiritual blockages. The tears are not merely physiological reactions, but the body's participation in this sacred purification process. In medieval alchemy, this stage was represented by the nigredo or blackening, the necessary dissolution preceding transformation. Similarly, in shamanic traditions worldwide, ecstatic states, including sexual ecstasy, are followed by spontaneous crying or shaking as the body releases what no longer serves the soul. Modern men, disconnected from these wisdom traditions, often misinterpret these experiences as personal breakdowns rather than the sacred breakthroughs they truly represent. When a man weeps after sex without understanding why, he may be participating in an ancient ritual of rebirth, one his rational mind cannot comprehend, but his soul recognizes perfectly. These moments offer fleeting contact with what Jung called the self, the complete, divine aspect of personality, revealing that even in our most carnal moments, we are engaging in something far more profound than we imagine. Not just the joining of bodies, but the remembering of our spiritual wholeness. This perspective transforms how we understand male emotionality after sex. Rather than pathologizing these experiences, we might see them as the psyche's attempt to return to its natural state of integration, where sexuality and spirituality are not opposites, but different expressions of the same life force. In a culture that has severed sex from its sacred dimensions, reducing it to either mechanical function or casual recreation, these post-coital tears become subconscious rebellions, the soul's protest against being confined to such narrow interpretations. They remind us that our bodies know what our minds have forgotten, that Eros has always been, and will always be, a doorway to the divine. When a man allows himself to fully experience this vulnerability without shame, he doesn't just heal his personal psychology, he participates in the healing of an ancient split in human consciousness itself, restoring the sacred marriage within and without. From childhood, boys are conditioned to equate masculinity with emotional restraint, taught that real men don't cry, don't show vulnerability, and certainly don't reveal weakness after something as supposedly straightforward as sex. Toxic masculinity enforces this through ridicule, shame, and the implicit threat of lost respect, leaving many men stranded in a paradox where they're expected to perform sexually but never feel too deeply about it. The result is a stifling of emotional honesty, where even natural reactions like post-coital sadness must be suppressed or rationalized away. When a man sheds tears in this intimate moment, it isn't just personal, it's a quiet rebellion against centuries of conditioning. Those tears defy the archetype of the stoic, unflappable man, revealing instead a humanity that patriarchal norms have long tried to erase. This conditioning runs so deep that many men don't just hide their emotions from others, they hide them from themselves. The repression becomes automatic, making any sudden surge of feeling, like post-sex melancholy, terrifying in its unfamiliarity. Worse, when these emotions surface, men often interpret them as failure, proof they're too sensitive or not man enough. But what if the opposite is true? What if the capacity to sit with this vulnerability is the mark of a deeper, more integrated masculinity? The tears that come after sex aren't a flaw, they're a corrective, the psyche's way of dismantling the lie that men must always be in control. History and myth are full of hidden acknowledgments that male emotionality after sex is anything but unnatural. Consider Hercules, the archetypal strong man of Greek mythology, who was said to weep after his encounters with the sorceress Omphale, a moment often glossed over in favor of his heroic feats. Yet this detail is telling. Even the paragon of masculinity was brought to his knees by the emotional aftershocks of passion. Ancient storytellers understood what modern culture forgets, that sex unravels the ego, leaving a man momentarily defenseless against his own depths. Modern anecdotes echo this truth. On Reddit threads and Jungian forums, men confess to experiences they've never shared aloud. After sex, I once sobbed for an hour, not out of sadness, but because it felt like something inside me broke open. Another writes, it's like all the walls come down, and suddenly I'm grieving things I didn't even know I'd lost. These aren't outliers. They're evidence of a shared, if silenced, male experience. The difference is that today, without mythic frameworks to make sense of it, men are left stranded in their shame. The first step is normalization, recognizing that post-sex emotions, whether tears, melancholy, or unexpected clarity, aren't aberrant, but human. For men conditioned to distrust vulnerability, this alone can be revolutionary. But beyond acceptance lies opportunity. These moments of raw openness are prime territory for self-discovery. Reflection post-intimacy becomes a tool. Instead of rushing to dress or distract, pause. Ask, what am I feeling? Where in my body is it located? Does this connect to something older? The answers might surprise you. A childhood memory, a buried grief, or simply the relief of feeling real for the first time all day. Jungian techniques like dream analysis and active imagination can deepen this work. The anima and shadow often speak most clearly in dreams, especially after emotionally charged experiences like sex. Keeping a journal by the bed to record dreams or fleeting post-coital impressions can reveal patterns over time. Active imagination, dialoguing with figures from dreams or fantasies, can help integrate what emerges. Ultimately, this isn't about pathologizing natural emotionality, but reclaiming it. The goal isn't to fix post-sex tears, but to listen to them, to recognize that in a culture that prizes male stoicism, the willingness to feel fully might be the most subversive act of all. What we dismiss as a simple biological response, those unexpected tears after sex, reveals itself to be something far more profound when viewed through Jung's lens. They are not a glitch in masculinity, but a testament to the psyche's relentless drive toward wholeness. In those vulnerable moments, when the body is spent and the mind is quiet, the unconscious speaks, through the anima's longing, the shadow's buried grief, or the soul's ancient recognition of sacred union. These tears are not weakness, they are the suppressed language of a deeper self, one that refuses to be silenced by rigid stereotypes of what a man should feel. So we turn to you. Have you ever experienced this? That wave of emotion after intimacy, confusing, overwhelming, maybe even transformative? Share your story in the comments below. Let's break the silence around male vulnerability, one honest conversation at a time. And if you're fascinated by how the unconscious reveals itself in our most private moments, don't miss our next exploration, Jung on Sexual Dreams, where we'll decode the hidden messages your psyche sends when you're asleep. Because the journey to self-awareness doesn't end when the tears dry, it's only just begun. Until then, remember, the goal isn't to avoid the emotions that unsettle you, but to meet them with curiosity. After all, as Jung himself knew, it's in our deepest surrenders that we often find our truest strength.